Stay humble. JustProfessor here. You're late because traffic was terrible. They're late because they're irresponsible. You forgot something because you were overwhelmed. They forgot because they don't care. You made a mistake because circumstances were difficult. They made a mistake because they're incompetent. Same action, different explanation. And you don't even notice you're doing it. This is actor-observer bias, and it's destroying your relationships while making you blind to your own flaws. When you do something wrong, you blame the situation. When someone else does something wrong, you blame their character. You give yourself endless context and understanding, but you judge everyone else like their actions define who they are. And this double standard is making you unfair, hypocritical, and completely unable to see yourself clearly. So what is actor-observer bias? It's when you explain your own behavior based on external circumstances, but explain other people's behavior based on their personality. You're the actor in your own life, so you know all the reasons behind your actions. All the pressure you were under. All the things that went wrong. But you're an observer of everyone else's life, so all you see is what they did. You don't see their struggles, their stress, their context, so you judge them by their actions alone. Here's why this is such a massive problem. You're holding two completely different standards and you think you're being fair. When you snap at someone, it's because you had a rough day. When they snap at you, it's because they're mean. When you don't finish a project on time, it's because you had too much on your plate. When they don't finish on time, it's because they're lazy. You're explaining away your own failures while condemning others for the exact same thing. This makes you impossible to work with. Your coworker makes a mistake, and you think they're careless. You make a mistake, and you list 10 reasons why it wasn't your fault. Your partner forgets to do something, and you think they don't care about you. You forget to do something, and you explain that you were busy and stressed. You see the pattern? You're demanding empathy for yourself while refusing to give it to anyone else. Actor-observer bias also makes you terrible at taking responsibility. Because every time you mess up, your brain immediately starts looking for external reasons. It wasn't you. It was the situation. You had no choice. You did your best under the circumstances, and all of that might be true. But the problem is, you don't extend that same understanding to other people. So you're constantly excusing yourself while blaming everyone around you. Let me show you how this plays out in real life. You're driving and someone cuts you off. Immediately you think they're a jerk, they're reckless, they're a bad driver. But when you cut someone off, you don't think any of that. You think you didn't see them. You were distracted. You were in a hurry for a good reason. Same action. But when it's you, it's the situation's fault. When it's them, it's their fault. Or think about arguments. You say something hurtful and you think it's because you were upset. You didn't mean it. You were emotional. Context matters. But when they say something hurtful, you don't think about their emotional state. You think they meant it. They're cruel. They don't care about your feelings. You judge them by their words, but you judge yourself by your intentions, and that's not fair. This bias shows up in performance too. You underperform at work and you have a list of reasons. Budget cuts, lack of support, unrealistic deadlines, bad management, all external. But when your coworker underperforms, you don't think about any of that. You think they're not trying hard enough. They're not good at their job. They don't have what it takes. You see their failure as internal while yours is external. Actor-observer bias makes you think you're better than you are. Because you're constantly giving yourself the benefit of the doubt. You know all your good intentions. You know how hard you try. You know all the obstacles you face. So you see yourself as someone who's doing their best in difficult circumstances, but you don't see that in other people. You only see their results. So they look worse than you even when they're facing the same challenges or worse. Here's where this gets really toxic. Relationships. Your partner does something that upsets you. You immediately assume it's about their character. They're selfish. They don't think about you. They don't care. But when you do something that upsets them, you explain it away. You were tired. You were stressed. You didn't realize. You want them to understand your context, but you refuse to consider theirs. And that destroys trust and creates resentment. This bias also makes it impossible to learn from your mistakes. Because if every mistake you make is caused by external factors, then there's nothing to fix about yourself. The situation was bad. The timing was wrong. Other people let you down. But you? You're fine. So you never improve. You just keep making the same mistakes and blaming the same external factors while wondering why your life doesn't get better. So, why does your brain do this? Why does it judge you by your intentions but judge everyone else by their actions? Because you have access to your own internal world. You know what you were thinking, what you were feeling, what you were dealing with. So when you evaluate your own behavior, you have all that information. It makes sense to you. But with other people, you don't have that access. All you see is what they did. So you judge them based on limited information and assume their actions reflect their character. Your brain also does this to protect your ego. If you admitted that your mistakes were your fault, you'd have to face the fact that you're flawed. That you're sometimes careless, lazy, selfish, or wrong. That's uncomfortable. So your brain finds external explanations to protect you from that discomfort, but it doesn't need to protect other people's egos. So it blames them directly without hesitation. This bias is also reinforced by perspective. When you're the actor, you're focused on the situation around you, the obstacles, the pressures, the constraints. But when you're the observer, you're focused on the person, what they're doing, how they're behaving. That difference in focus leads to different explanations. You see the situation when it's you. You see the person when it's them. So how do you fight actor-observer bias? How do you stop judging people unfairly while excusing yourself? First, flip the perspective. When someone does something that bothers you, ask yourself what external factors might explain it. What could they be dealing with? What pressures might they be under? Force yourself to consider their situation the same way you consider your own. Most of the time, you'll realize they have just as many valid reasons as you do. Second, judge yourself the way you judge others. When you make a mistake, ask yourself what someone else would think if they saw your behavior without knowing your reasons. Would they think you're careless, lazy, selfish? If yes, then maybe that's closer to the truth than the excuses you're making. Hold yourself to the same standard you hold everyone else. Third, assume good intentions. Most people are not trying to be difficult. Most people are not trying to hurt you or let you down. They're just dealing with their own stress, their own problems, their own limitations, just like you. So when someone messes up, start by assuming they had reasons. That doesn't mean you ignore the impact. It just means you don't immediately blame their character. Fourth, ask for their perspective. Instead of assuming you know why someone did something, ask them. Most of the time, they'll give you context you didn't know. And that context will make their behavior make sense. You'll realize they weren't being a jerk. They were responding to something you couldn't see. And finally, take more responsibility. When you mess up, resist the urge to immediately list external factors. Yes, circumstances matter, but you also made choices. You also had control, own that. Because the more you take responsibility for your own behavior, the easier it becomes to recognize that other people's behavior is also influenced by circumstances beyond their control. Look, actor-observer bias is one of those things that makes you a hypocrite without realizing it. You think you're being fair, you think you're being reasonable, but you're applying completely different standards to yourself versus everyone else. And that makes you impossible to deal with. It makes you judgmental. It makes you defensive. And it keeps you stuck because you can't learn from your mistakes if you never think they were your fault. The truth is, you're not that different from the people you judge. You're all just humans trying to get through life while dealing with stress, pressure, and limited resources. The difference is you know your own story, you know your reasons. But everyone else has a story too. And if you knew their reasons, you'd probably be a lot more understanding. So next time you catch yourself thinking someone is lazy, careless, or selfish, stop. Ask yourself if you'd think the same thing about yourself if you did what they did. And if the answer is no, maybe you're not seeing them clearly. Maybe you're just seeing their actions without their context. And maybe that's not fair. Subscribe if you just realized you've been judging people way too harshly.